Okay, carry on.
Okay. In the face of tremendous adversity, LGBTQ communities demonstrated remarkable resilience, organizing at the grassroots level to support one another, advocate for better care, and demand visibility. Juniper House symbolizes this resilience and the community's ability to confront overwhelming challenges. Juniper House holds exceptional significance, historical and cultural significance, as a key site in Oregon's fight against HIV/AIDS. It served as both a sanctuary and a hub for activism, providing critical support during a time of fear, discrimination, and limited healthcare access. The property embodies the determination of LGBTQ communities and their efforts to shape healthcare advocacy and foster solidarity. Juniper House remains a powerful symbol of compassion, activism, and community-driven change. Thank you for considering your support.
Thank you, Shane. Any questions from committee members for Shane? Perfect. We do have, we also have, yeah.
I have a brief question for the chairs. I was looking at the founding of all of these different institutions in the comparable analysis. And I'm curious if it has, and it mentions briefly, but I may have missed the connection, federal funding and federal effort. I'm curious if there's any time between when these organizations were all funded in some type of federal grant or funding, pass-through grants or something that led to them all to be established around the same time. Because when I was looking at it, there's just a really tight period of years there. So I'm just kind of curious if there's any connection or it's just circumstantial is the moment for these types of organizations to be founded.
When I was talking to Doc Olin, and who has more of the recollection of during this period of time, I think it was coincidental with the period. I also thought about that connection, and I was like, this is the time when some of the funds are finally open to the public and open to this organization. But I think it might have been coincidental with that period that was like probably at the peak of the crisis and all the things were happening and people started reacting to it. However, I would say that it will be facilitated for them to open and propose this project over to the state and say, we're gonna open this place and we'll have this. And then that might have been, I don't have a proof for it. Like I don't have a document or anything that will tell me, yes, this is how it was. But I would think that it was a moment that the state said, good, here, there are some that will support you in this process. But I couldn't find anything that would really make that connection. That's why I didn't really want to write it in there, but I have an implied thing within the timelines of events happening throughout the state and the country as a whole. Sure. And what's happening.
No, I think you did that well. I was just kind of curious if there was more of a substantial connection there than was stated in the nomination. So thank you for your answer.
Yep.
Any other questions of the preparers? I believe Brandy Penner is online. Wish to speak. Actually, before we do that, pause real quick. I forgot to ask if there are any conflicts of interest on this nomination. I will just mention that Shane Watson is a dear friend of mine. I've been working with her 25 years ago. Lo and behold, I didn't remember she helped on this nomination because Katie left that part out for me. So that was nice. I'm not throwing her under the bus. Anybody wish to challenge me on my long-term friendship? Okay. All right, Brandy Kenner. We do not have Brandy. Okay. Well, then that is. Oh, are there? Nobody else signed up?
I think Kate Gage is going to talk online. No.
Do we have Kate Gage signed up?
Hi, this is Kay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You know-
Can you go ahead and state your name and address for the record?
It's Kay Gage, and the address is 2006 Southeast Ankeny. That's the Juniper House, Portland, Oregon 97214.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the reasons I think that this building is so important, and we recently experienced an epidemic, COVID, where everybody rallied, medical providers rallied, and changes happened quickly. And during the HIV time, it was 4 years before the politicians even acknowledged it. And the community of people who were suffering from HIV had to figure out ways to take care of themselves. And I think it so fully embraces that community's ability, despite the fact that many of them were dying, to rally to take care of each other. Juniper House, there's a OPB video documentary done by Gwyneth Kemeth Booth in 1988. And even then, she had to keep the address of Juniper House confidential. They wouldn't release it because they were afraid of community backlash and because of fears of people having someone being cared about with HIV in their community. So I think that this was able to thrive and take care of people and was run primarily by volunteers is a testimony to how that community was able to rally despite the fact that the medical community, the politicians, society was kind of turning a blind eye to what was happening to them. And the house also has had a history of being a birthing center, a PSRB center. It's been a healing institution. Now it's for therapists. And I know that doesn't necessarily connect to the HIV, but that particular property has served the community of disenfranchised people on a variety of levels, HIV being probably the most important. And I think that, if you wanted to look at the documentary by Gwyneth Campbell Booth, it really speaks to that whole time frame. And so as the owner, I am in full support of it. I think it's a meaningful property for that very reason. Thanks.
Thank you. For calling here. All right. Well, Greg, if you'd like to start some discussion of your review of the nomination.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Gregory Shine. I'm one of the committee members. I have to say, I really enjoyed reviewing this nomination, and it's absolutely fitting that this site is being nominated. I find it a very strong nomination. I especially appreciate some of the reorganization that was done to several of the sections. I think, to me at least, it reads very logically and easily to me. So I think the organization, especially in the narrative, has been improved and is very impressive. There are also some of the little things that really add up. So in the facts and sources, for instance, I thought there's a very good use of the sources, including some of the TV news coverage and the interviews that were conducted in the oral histories. Also in the supporting materials, I especially liked the links to the videos that showed images of the house in context. So, of course, with the nature of the house, and even with the address not being shared, it's not something that it seemingly to me that there was a lot of publicity and a lot of photographs taken. So I thought it was very creative to have to have pulled some of the photos, stills from the video that show the inside of the house and provide that perspective. And also just having those links in the nomination and being able to watch those two video segments with showing the interior of the house as well as the broader context, I thought was very helpful and a great addition. Um, what I saw is probably the big challenge here was does the nomination make the case for significance of the level of exceptional importance, and is it and within the statewide context? And this is a bit of a higher bar. So the nomination presents, as Katie pointed out, this 7-point argument for exceptional importance. One of those components, the fourth bullet, was that its influence extended beyond its immediate action, inspiring the establishment of several more end-of-life care facilities dedicated to individuals with HIV/AIDS in Portland and other Oregon cities. It said specifically that it, quote, inspired the establishment of several additional care facilities across Oregon and the Pacific Northwest, helping to further address the gap in care for people with HIV and AIDS. It also says, quote, within just 2 years of opening, Juniper House inspired the establishment of several more end-of-life care facilities dedicated to individuals with HIV/AIDS in Portland, Hillsborough, Roseburg, and Eugene. It also then goes on to include a comparative analysis of these end-of-care facilities, and this was another addition, I think, that greatly lends to the nomination. But how does it make the case for exceptional importance, specifically within the statewide context? And how did it inspire other facilities in the state? This is something that was mentioned in the memorandum of July 15th and asked for clarification. So in looking through here, what several additional care facilities across Oregon and the Pacific Northwest did that Juniper House inspire the establishment? Well, I was able to find one explicit example that was in the additional documentation, actually page 62 on Doug Ferland's quote, where he says specifically that he spoke at various venues advocating for the establishment of similar supportive environments. And this was reported in the Coos Bay World. The form also provides one implied example in the discussion of Our House on page 26. Jan Wannon, a nurse at Juniper House, co-founded Our House in 1988 with another Juniper House volunteer. It goes on to say on page 63 that's nearly 2 years of dedicated service at Our House helped lay a strong foundation for its enduring legacy in the community. The form also then says that on page 26, given Our House's origins as a Juniper House initiative, and it goes on. But where is this shown? I'm not able to. I would like to see a citation for that and for some of these other statements. Now there is an indirect. The narrative describes how Juniper House raised awareness about the need for end-of-life care for people with HIV and AIDS through media appearances and community outreach, and this may have contributed to the establishment of other facilities, but that's not specifically mentioned. So where are the others described? Well, they're primarily compares Juniper House to these other facilities. It's unclear to what extent its influence extended to these other facilities in the state and in the Northwest, as was stated earlier in the nomination. The narrative notes that it did inspire these facilities, but it doesn't. I could not find detailed information about the specific ways in which it informed their planning or their operation. So it's really not clear to me how the Juniper House inspired the founding of other Oregon end-of-life care facilities for people with HIV and AIDS. I think this could be more explicitly shown and cited, specifically in the opening graph of the comparison analysis section, perhaps on 23, and certainly noted in the conclusion on page 26. And those are my the comments I have. And I'm happy to pick it up from there.
Very thorough. Thank you. Mr. Mark, would you like to add anything to that?
not all that much, apart from positive aspects of the nomination, which are many. The only criticism might be the one that came up earlier today about maps having scale and cardinal direction. And so beyond that, there's always a few types. Very complete in terms of overall section 8, good comparative. I like the appendix. The interview, it really helped contextualize what was at that period. Good work.
Jackie, any comments to that?
My main comment is that maybe the beginning of section 8 just needs a little bit of introduction about AIDS epidemic, just kind of a little bit of a timeline and the process of, the information that was out and how that changed over time and how that misinformation that caused a lot of this stigmatization, put this in context about transmission and treatment, and then a little bit about, just some of the issues with the disease and what kinds of care was required and provided. And I know that was covered a little bit in the thing, but just that little bit of just brief background at the beginning to kind of set the stage, I think would help me.
Jackie?
I think I had just made a note about some small technical edits in the comparative to the Carper House and the CC House that I think could be just cleaned up a little bit, but it nothing significant. I was really moved by the nomination and the testimony that accompanied it. I think I agree with the comments made by Greg and by the preparers on the house as well. So I just appreciate you putting this forward.
Okay. Julie? Sorry, I didn't say that loud enough. Julie?
Yes. No, it was very moving, and I appreciate it that it was an add time in our history and how we treated people. So I wish we hadn't done that, but here you go. I am a little bit struggling with the 1902 house. I know that was a good camouflage for the use, and I understand and appreciate that. But there's part of me that wants to know a little bit more about why the owner has spoken since then, because it's like, what happened after the house was it used for as the Juniper House? So maybe that doesn't have a place here, and that's okay. But from a national register perspective, I just want to make sure that it makes it through, and it may need a little more clarification on, like in 2010 to 2011, there were quite a few changes noted on page 9, and since the inside of the house is what is significant, I guess most significant, although the outside is too. I'm just a little bit concerned that it wouldn't stand up under scrutiny without a few minor changes, as Greg has suggested.
So, Julie, are you asking to understand your question better, are you asking or recommending that there be more information about period of significance during just context? Or are you talking about just more description and justification for the alterations the building still has, making the argument the building still has integrity?
No, I guess it's the dichotomy between what it was used for and what it looks like, and I know that's a major component, and it's in there, I just, maybe it needs to be reinforced.
Oh, I see. So the idea that it was intentionally left to look like a residential
So
structure,
it would fit in and people would know what it was being used for.
and the alterations were very much on the interior for the care of the resident.
Yes,
Okay,
I mean, I know it's kind of in there, but I think it needs to be reinforced.
Any ideas on how to address that?
I read it, I think it's in there, and I think it's just a matter of topic sentences and moving some things around like it often is. So I think it's very huge. It's about where you move it in the text so it's more obvious and gets its emphasis. I remember the passages where it's stressed, and I think the information is there.
It's just kind of buried.
Yeah, just kind of daylighting it a little bit should probably be sufficient, in my opinion.
Thank you.
I would just say the other piece that you commented on, sort of what happened to it after the period of significance. That's where my brain went to, and just a little bit of addition to the developmental history of the property would just sort of wrap that up with a paragraph, a short paragraph. I think would be a nice period on that sentence.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the focus, but it's important to kind of understand.
Yeah, it's current.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
Thank you. This is powerful and very moving. This nomination, and I don't have more to add than what was said, and I agree with Julie lifting that out. I know the language you're using is daylighting as well. This is just to me a really strong nomination, and I'm so privileged to be able to read it and learn more.
Ian, did you have any additional comments?
Yeah. I would like to, kind of what Greg talked about for the statewide significance. There's no question in my mind, if reading the nomination, that it is significant, but that statewide justification is a little soft. And could use some additional documentation, some of the differentiation made between the buildings. Or suggest, I'm questioning, like, when it says it was first or earlier, we're talking about months. And I think it raises the question of whether that's significant. One of the things I read through the text, and I don't know much about this history, so it would probably require a little more conversation to prepare, that stood out in my mind is that whether they liked it or not, the folks here at the Juniper House, those people ran this, were kind of brought out into the media and were influential. And I'm curious if that might be a source of that justification for statewide significance. I mean, it's clear they did not want it for obvious reasons, but regardless, they wound up being probably part of the metro area being pulled out into that. So I think there's some ways to kind of support that statewide significance if it chooses to go that way. Also, I'm going to murder the pronunciation, I call it the CC House structure that was just right next door. It's clear that it is an important facility and was aligned, but and some of the ways it's written, it almost suggests that it should also be nominated along with the structure. And there's a variety of ways to deal with that. I think I was seeing the through line of why we're nominating one and not the other, you know, a little bit of function or whatnot, but they're physically connected. It mentions that at least through, you know, through the landscaping anyway. There was I believe a gate or something, but some of the ways talked about, familiar with the way our reviewer thinks. And I think we need to just address a little bit more clearly in the nomination, why one and not both. So it doesn't raise that concern. If you recall, we were discussing boundaries at length earlier today. So I also think it comes to an issue of comparative analysis of, okay, if they're both individually unique, why the Juniper House and not the building next door? So,
That's the dark side of a comparative analysis like this, where you sort of march through things, because you can inadvertently make the case for like 6 other things being eligible at the same time. But I just also wanted, this is more of an aside comment, but reading in the paper today, you find sort of buried in the newspaper, a new AIDS treatment or a new HIV treatment, and I'm staggered by that lack of. It was all consuming in the 80s. It went through every level of society. This crisis, and it's we need to not forget. So thanks for bringing this forward.
Yes.
So Ian, I wanted to follow up on the point you made is, and I think I disagree that they don't make those differentiations. I thought it was pretty clear in here. It specifically says that the CC house was focused on housing those who could live independently, whereas the Juniper house was focused on end of life care. I think that differentiation is really the point that they're trying to draw home throughout. And I think perhaps that needs to just be made more clear, but I thought they did a really good job of differentiating, saying this was not an end of life care facility. This is focused specifically on that. I think there is some need to clarify. One is not more.
mhm.
I'll jump back in for a second.
Yeah.
And also just to clarify a little bit on the comments that I made, I think that it's very possible that you all have that information, those citations that show that the Juniper House inspired these others. I'm thinking about the interview with Jan Wynn that you have cited here. There may very well be within that interview somewhere where she says, yeah, and we went on to our house, and Juniper House inspired. It was our inspiration for doing this work, and I know it was at these other places as well. So you may already have that information in there because you've referred, the nomination has made the statements above. It's just finding those specific citations that show us that. It doesn't just tell us that.
I think, at least what I'm speaking about, and I think there's a lot of ways slice it. I'm not thinking there needs to be a lot of additional information. I think Greg put it just right. There's just a couple of sentences, a better topic sentence, a citation. That I felt like the entire time I was reading it was there, but not explicitly there. And so just, okay, what's the explicit connection here and there? Just a little more detail. And I think part of it is because we're in a part of history that's not well documented and other kinds of things. So just being a little more explicit would be helpful. I see Ernestine raising her hand.
One of the kind of complicated process with this nomination, as I mentioned in my intro, was the biography was relying on newspapers sometimes, or relying in someone's memory, and sometimes they could imply there was an inspiration. They just say like, this is the only one. Now they find only another one. So this kind of comments make you think like there's an inspiration, but there is not a saying then we open this one after this. So I want to understand if you want more relay, like direct, this was said, because I don't think I can find a direct information like that, but I can find that after this one opened, there was a triple effect, the finally opened, which didn't happen in the 5 weeks before that. Yes.
I think you can do that, just saying exactly what you said. I mean, the historical record is never going to be neat and tidy. So simply saying, putting that statement out there, then something, based on oral interviews, what people said from memory, and looking at the newspaper articles, you can cite those soft references. I think that's fine. It's nice when you have lots of documents to say explicitly what you like. tell me when you find that. So it's okay to say, hey, I'm making a pretty good educated guess from the information I have going forward, and I think that will do it. But I guess what Greg and I are commenting on is the space that's left. Does that make sense? So whatever evidence we have to fill that space, I think would be sufficient. If the Park Service disagrees, they'll ask us to correct it.
I had a couple minor comments, but one was just being that I guess that the period of significance going into less than 50 years, is there anything we need to touch on for that criteria G? I mean, it was addressed well in the nomination.
Hear us, but I'm still leaving it on because I'm curious to see what.
Was
Maybe our
that,
listeners can mute themselves, please.
I didn't know if that was a response. Is that going to kind of put this in the reviewer's eye at the national level as questionable? I mean, do we need to wait 2 more years, 3 more years?
I can speak to that a little bit. So anytime you check a criteria consideration, it will automatically review sense. With that said, while there's not any written guidance, my experience in conversations with our reviewer, Paul Lusignan, they tend not to be overly concerned with just a couple 3 years.
Okay.
So, and especially since you have a very significant context here, you have a well-documented property, I wouldn't anticipate any problems, but I will tell you it will wind up on his desk and he will read it. So.
Right. I think they addressed it really well, but I just didn't know. I mean, yeah, that was my question. Do we need to wait a couple years? Hopefully not.
No, I wouldn't advise.
And then to, I think Jackie's point, an additional description of the HIV and the AIDS epidemic, even just to the point, I mean, I think everybody probably knows what those acronyms stand for. But so many things are acronyms, I think it'd be helpful. And then for me, on the architectural side, I would look at those architectural descriptions, and as we got further into the description, there was more identification on which windows were replaced and which weren't. In the first couple, it was unclear if the vinyl window replacements were in the existing openings or if any of the openings changed. So just identifying that and the operation of windows. I know, a lot of times people pull out stuff, they put in a slider, so just making sure that so we know that what the changes were. As I said, further on in the description, it did that in the full paragraphs. Otherwise, again, an incredible history lesson. I was living through it, but I was quite young at the time. And it was amazing to hear and be a part of history lesson, like we always do, but some are more impactful than others. Really commend everybody for bringing this to life.
Just a comment to the comment there. One of the things that I want to disagree slightly on the introductory section about the history of HIV and AIDS in the United States. To me, the narrative section that begins there on page 14, I think that does an excellent job of summarizing that, understanding that there's limited space and based on some of the recommendations in the earlier revision letter. So my suggestion is that if we are asking for more about the early history of AIDS, maybe we can say specifically what's missing so they know what would need to be added.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with just filling out HIV and AIDS. Jackie, do you want to?
Yeah, I was thinking also about the fact that people were in the beginning unsure about how it was transmitted. And so there was that stigma of hospitals treating people, and then also being able to test, having tests available that may have changed how people view people with HIV, that might help understand why they were segregated or stigmatized a little bit.
Right, to help set the stage of why this is such a tragic
Yeah.
location, so more, yeah, specifically on that. There were a couple comments from, I think the Portland Landmarks Commission. They suggested the statement of significance could benefit for more information about how the Juniper House compares to other facilities. And then given criteria A, some commissioners wanted to understand more about what the daily life was like at the Juniper House. How were the residents, selected to come in here? Was there a sense of community, or were the residents, confined to their rooms? Did they cook for themselves, or were meals provided? There was a lot of discussion on how the kitchen changed with that. I just wanted to touch on those two things because I thought suggest you look at those and unless you want to.
Well, I can say that I do have, that information from the blog when we talk about it. And that helped me describe the building as how it was during that period, that we have explained the description, but I didn't go into explanation on the daily life, but I think it really was also people in that setting. And I think that was it.
Right, so over to you if you have any further thoughts or comments.
I don't have any.
Would you like to make the motion? You have a chance to ask us any other.
Do any of my fellow committee members or any of the staff have any additional thoughts for this? It sounds like we may be, I guess, fellow committee members, are we at the point where we'd like to make a recommendation for moving this forward with the specific additions that have been mentioned? Would someone like to make that? You.
I think yours.
Yes.
Nominate you.
Yes, I accept that. I would like to recommend to SHPO that this move forward with some specific clarifications that have been mentioned herein. Specifically clarification about the statewide significance of the facility. Number two being a clarification of the history of the early history of AIDS, specifically around the stigmatism of the AIDS virus, the understanding of the AIDS virus. And is there another component with those components?
And the spelling out of AIDS.
So the acronym.
And the spelling, yeah, and the clarification is spelling out of the acronyms, including AIDS.
And the maps need to have scales down here.
And the maps need to have scales, scales and north arrows with those conditions. I recommend that we move it forward to SHPO. Anyone?
Second.
Right, we have a motion and a second. The motion is to recommend SHPO take it forward to the paper.
Yes.
Right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Really well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
It is 2:46. I suggest we take a 10 minute. We take a 10 minute break?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, please. Minute 5.
Thank you for the ball.
To reconvene our meeting on State Advisory Committee on Historic Preservation. Thank you. While we took a little break there, our next nomination is the Lee Janet, don't know how to pronounce it, so Katie can correct me, House in Medford. Turn it over to staff, please.
Thank you. The committee will now consider the Lee Janish House in Medford in Jackson County. The Lee Janish House is located on a corner lot in a neighborhood composed of mostly pre-World War II single-family residential development. It is prominently sited and set back from the corner of a generally flat lot. The house itself was completed in 1934, and it was built in the National Park Service rustic or Cascadian style, with battered stone-clad walls on the first floor and board and batten siding above. It has a gabled roof expanded by dormers on the west and north facade and a stone chimney. Original multi-light steel sash windows remain in almost all of the original windows. Exterior changes in the period of significance include the construction of a perimeter wood fence, in addition of a few minor outbuildings. Serial roof replacement of the basement level garage door on the west or side facade, addition of the wood shutters with the tree motif, and creation of an additional bedroom with a shed dormer. This shed dormer on the south or rear facing facade. Interior changes, with the exception of that added bedroom, are generally just finishes. The nomination asserts that the property retains integrity across all 7 aspects: location, setting, design, material, workmanship, feeling, and association. Next slide. The nomination argues that the property is locally significant in the area of architecture, as an excellent, though somewhat unusual example of National Park Service rustic or Cascadian architecture used for a private residence. It is unusual because although it is a private home located outside of the National Park system, it was built using materials, equipment, and labor from Crater Lake National. The builder was Ike Davidson, who was also the foreman of construction at Crater Lake and who took on outside construction projects like this on site or in the off season, and using government-owned equipment and materials that he sourced from the park. In the same year, the Lee Janish House was completed. Davidson and the supervisor at Crater Lake National Park, Superintendent Albert Smolinski, were terminated by the Park Service and arrested for misuse of funds. Davidson was not convicted because he agreed to testify against his former boss, Smolinski, who was found guilty on 14 counts of having defrauded the government. Because the house was constructed by the foreman of construction at Crater Lake National Park, using techniques and materials from the park, the nomination asserts that it is an authentic expression of the rustic style and exhibits distinctive characteristics, such as locally sourced battered stone cladding in what has been termed the Crater Lake wall treatment, board and batten siding in the gable ends, and simple interior finishes. The period of significance is the date of the resource's construction, 1934. In summary, the discussion for the committee today is: does the nomination make the case for local significance under criterion C? And does the Lee Janish House maintain sufficient integrity to communicate that significance? We received the CLG's recommendation of the nomination with no additional comments, and this was provided to the committee via email prior to this meeting. No additional public comments were received. Does the committee have any questions for Shipos?
Do any commissioners have any conflicts of interest or bias to declare?
No.
Yep. And we will turn it over to the preparer, George Kramer, I believe. Right. Come in, online. Okay. Oh, got the wrong picture up there.
Hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, George. One second. Can you go back? Okay. Okay, go ahead, George. Will you state your name for the record, please.
Certainly. Good afternoon. My name's George Kramer. My address is 386 North Laurel in Ashland, and I'm the preparer of the nomination for the property owner, Mike Ayers. I think in the nearly 40 years that I've presented nominations to this committee, this is one of the very few that meets the criteria or is what my mother thinks I do for a living. It's a beautiful house in excellent condition, nominated to the National Register under Criterion C. For those of us, if you've ever been in Medford or you've ever driven by this house, it's what we call a head snapper. It doesn't really belong where it is. And it's known locally as the Crater Lake House for obvious reasons. The local history has always been that the superintendent of Crater Lake lived there and that the Park Service built it for him. Mr. Ayers, the owner, has owned it for over 50 years and started to prepare a nomination on the property some time ago that he found daunting and never completed. But thankfully, at that point, he reached out to the surviving previous owner, Dima Lee, a relative of Ike Davidson, the builder, and other people that had worked on the project, either via letter or via phone, and kept incredible notes, which he saved. And so that information, all from individuals who are no longer living, really gave a snapshot into the construction of this house and its odd history and the legal challenge to Mr. Zielinski. And when he called and asked me to help him put this on the register, it answered all of those questions. And so it was an honor to prepare this nomination on this really intact, amazingly intact house that Mr. Ayers has protected for half a century and document what its actual history is and why it is appropriately known as the Crater Lake House. There is, as mentioned in the nomination, one other house that we know that Mr. Davidson built, which is a very short distance from this one. There are photos in the nomination. It's been converted to a rental and lacks the integrity of this house, which on the exterior is virtually unchanged other than some compatible modifications that have been made. And with that, I would answer any questions you have.
George, this is Steve Mark. Knowing these houses, one worked in terms of comparative properties. There are two in the West. What were they considered?
You cut out a little bit, Steve. There are two in West Medford, did I hear you say?
Yeah. One's behind Blackbird and the other one is on Oakdale.
I'm familiar with the one behind Blackbird. I can't come up with an image of the one on Oakdale. I assume that one must be on the register as part of the Oakdale Historic District.
It may be.
Yeah. I don't know that those were Davidson houses, but I certainly I would be willing to look at those and see what they are, and certainly add some photographs if they're comparable. The two houses that were mentioned and documented as associated to Davidson by one of the workers that he worked with, who was I think probably a Park Service employee over the winter building houses, was the other one on East Main. But that would be great if there was a couple others.
Yeah, one, I think the one on Oakdale you should look at. I think that the trust is 1,000.
Well, if nothing else, it deserves a mention as a comparable house. I wonder is it of the same vintage or is it much earlier?
Oh yeah. It's have a look. It's there's some details are slightly different, like the entry.
Okay.
You wouldn't build a house with an entry like that.
Excellent. Okay, I'll check it out.
At least a crater.
Are there any other questions of the preparer?
I have a question. So this is Kathy Rippey, and maybe this is a typo. There's a mention in here about the later owners, Teeters, and it says they were both frequently mentioned in the lost papers. maybe this is just my ignorance, but what are the lost papers?
No, thank you. There are a couple of typos that I caught when I read through it this morning, and that was one of them. That should have been local papers.
Okay. That's it.
Well. Should we turn it over to Steve then? Would you like to? I don't think there are any other people who wish to speak on this.
Yeah, I should probably give you a little background. Mike Ayers asked me to come to his house in 1989. By that time, I guess people started to know that there was a historian at the park. And so I came down and I took some photos, and it would show you what, these are slides, and because that was the dominant thing at the time. And they would show what the house looked like some 30 years ago. There are changes. Most of them are fairly subtle. There's a few things that, we could argue about. It's private property. I'm used to the public dealing with park maintenance and preservation, and despite the agency having that as part of its mission, it can be we continue to do, as regional architect once said, missionary, trying to get the message of the gospel. So my approach to the house itself is on a very small lot. It's 0.17, and that's kind of critical, because as far as I know, the other nominated and listed properties, unless the Oakdale one's an exception, part of the district, are on either national or state park land. In some cases, they're worse on Prescott Park, up on Roxy Ann, until changes were made as in kind of midnight demolition. There are some remnants. But generally, and that was really an NPS project in terms of design. One of the difficulties that all the private properties have in Medford is that we really don't know much about design. Because as far as the scandal went, it didn't include the people that did design at the park, either Merle Sager or Francis Lang, or some of the people that were hired through the CCC program in terms of design, both the state, well, sometimes the state parks, but also the national park as well, in the SEAS project. I don't want to get it too bogged down in details, but some background about this idea of style and the rustic style. I sent out a couple of emails to the committee members and staff about that idea, and I found something that I remember. I mean, I did anything. Like a lot of people, I collect stuff, and I found this. It was listed as a NHL theme study about Adirondack grape camps, and they made an interesting statement. It's a header. It's called "Rustic Assimilation of Architectural Styles, Traditions, and Forms." What rustic is generally classed as is landscape. Not even though it has building, but it's about the whole landscape. And my argument is that it not being a style, and that word Cascadian, that's originated in a book by a geologist, Warren Dupree Smith, who taught at the U of O. He wrote a book called The Scenic Treasure House of Oregon. Binford and Mort put it out in 1940, and somehow put that name in. So that's its origination, but as a way of rustic, it needs space. That's its biggest requirement, because imposing any of human works on the landscape is thought of as an imposition. Nature should be the dominant force. And the problem with town lots, or suburban lots, is that what developers usually do is grade it as flat as they can, or maybe a slight incline. And so nature doesn't get a chance to speak very much on these places because you are in a, I think about my own place, it's 0.38 of an acre and it's on flat and there's nothing rustic about it. It's got an old auto camp in the back, it's on skids. So the landscaping here is quite diverse and not something you would find in most state or national parks, even though you have some native species. But it's very much an urban setting, and it's got foundation planting, and, lovely rockwork. You know, I don't dispute the integrity of things. There are changes, as Katie reviewed with those slides. But it's this whole business of, oh, if it's a style or it's architecture and see, well, that's possible. But I would say that the people that designed those, the landscape architects, and they were doing it in a much older tradition of estate design. And so estates also need lots of space and fuel because you're trying to show off. But of course, pay attention to nature and integrating with that tradition. Now, in America, we did some adaptations. We talked about, instead of Goths, like you'd have in Britain, you had pioneers. And so things like the DAR cabinet, Shampooey, for example, were like no pioneer ever lived in a luxurious cabinet. Having had a grandfather who was born with a dirt floor. So anyway, so it gives us something of a problem if we want to see rustic in its true light. It's both incredibly attractive, but also hugely expensive. And most of these places were built at a time when materials and labor were at their lowest point in American history relative to the economy. So you could afford to build something. But it's something to be considered when we talk about preservation and the long run. How do you maintain it? So that's most of my argument there. And I'm trying to think if I skipped over. I do have this Andorra document that I took what I thought were the most handy pages for me out. It's not sequential, but it's got some interesting stuff in it. And it's a nice link because the great camps are often used as this link. Okay, there's Europe. Now we've got these rich guys building these camps in upstate New York. And suddenly we're talking about public properties. What do we do? What is good enough to be built in a national park or state? Well, ta-da, with some changes. The one on Crater Lake Avenue actually is closest to replicating a park design. I know this because I lived in one of that same dimension at headquarters. Sadly, whoever the recent owner was replaced a lot of the wood shingle components and stuff. And it looks like a bad choice because it is a bad choice. And the comparative properties, the one behind Blackbird, you would have thought that Medford had a window tint. A lot of the windows are blocked up. And yet it's lovely. Why would you do that? I like the one in Oakdale a lot because it's simple. It's very simple. It's fairly fun. However, that's me. I have spent a lot of my time, my spare time, going out and trying to find more examples. So I had a Google on this, and eventually I got it with Francis Lang helping me along. He recovered after I made that statement during our interview, and was very helpful. So I think he died at age 94. Anyway, that's what I have to say at the moment. And we'll get to, because I want to hear what she's what you see of it.
Thank you. Well, gone around the room both ways, on the previous two. Anybody want to just start first? Yes.
I just had some comments about the design, and yeah, it's kind of wonky for me to see it in the middle of that space. And it reminds me of the Forest Service compound in Blount. Same trees on the side of it and, on the inside, the ranger station housing had the same similar stone fireplace, and it just has the same look and feel, and that was created by the Conservation Corps in 1937 and 38. So it's that similar look and feel, clearly federal, and it was part of just, it was specific to the compound. So it's kind of messing with my head a little bit to have it in the middle of this space that it just feels like it's a mistake.
Well, and the Forest Service did more standardized designs with timberline as a huge exception.
Yeah.
This was private, right?
Mhm.
Any other comments, Glenn?
Well, it's in that same green because it has a comparison of places outside within them. So compare it to. So, I guess that's all I have to say about it. It's just niggling.
Yeah, what often you say is great, like is you have stone grounds floor and then the boarded back.
Julie, any comments?
No, I thought the scandal with the park superintendent was fascinating. So from a historic perspective, is that, I guess we don't need to add criteria in it. Other than that, maybe just some minor things with the figures referenced on page 14. I'm not sure they line up with the figures that are attached. So just a minor thing. As far, I'm sorry, as far as your discussion of it needing more space, that really brings home the why, who built it and why it's there to me, because it's not an. So I think that's a significant aspect of it. I'm not, that's.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about some of the basic ideas of rustic architecture. Nature is to be honored. And there's a problem. Take it down to this, putting a country house in an urban setting, that there's going to be trade-offs.
That's it. So I found a few little typos that I won't walk through, but certainly I'll share with Katie for reading. But I have to say I didn't know anything about this house until we got the nomination. I'm obsessed with this house. I love it. This house. I think it's so cute. For me, it really does just evoke that sense of being in the park or being in that public space in a private space. And I think that for me, it does what it's intending to do, like what the builders intended it to do for me. So I don't have any concerns about the lack of space. I think it's really unique and beautiful, and it's the character.
Ms. Jackie?
Yeah, I was also fascinated by the history and the scandal and the whole idea of them taking a rock from the campground construction and bringing it in, bringing the rock in and then bringing building supplies back to the market. Interesting story. And then I would also have liked to see in section 7, under the known alteration section, just a recap and summary, because of all those alterations and about that time and the time period. That's always helpful. And then, yeah, just thinking about that discussion about rustic and it being in, maybe that's just something that we need to just mention how that that's.
Yeah, even word.
Yeah, but it might, typically mean, but how this setting makes it so unusual. But how it relates back to the, park architecture or other types of that style that is used in other settings. Maybe just more emphasis on that might help with, explaining the style and the difference. Right?
Yeah, I would concur with that. As well as comments of some of my other colleagues as well. And I as well as very excited by the story. I look forward to the 4-part series on Netflix. I don't have a lot to add. Just one minor observation that on page 11 mentions that there's a little teaser there about Adema Lee possibly having a role in the design. I just wonder if there's anything more there that could be pulled out or could connect to women's roles in the era of design and architecture.
Got a question for me?
Well, sure.
There's unfortunately, not a lot of information. Dima Lee never remarried. There was very little information about her. In conversation with Mr. Ayers, I think, is where she indicated that she had some impact on the design. There were no blueprints. Steve is probably right that there could have been. I think what actually happened here is that Ike Davidson knew how to build buildings at Crater Lake, and he just built one without plan. And that she might have helped with a floor plan or something like that. But there's no specific information or any indication she had any design background or any even artist. I mean, she was an optometrist's wife is the only thing you know about her reading the reports, the period reports. So yeah, I that would be fascinating. And as long as I have the floor, I want to respond to Steve's comment about space. I totally get that rustic architecture in Park Service settings has space and landscape around it. And I tried to talk about this as an unusual example of NPS rustic in a private residential setting, because I think they you have to assume that the Lees went up and went, wow, those are really cool buildings. We want one like that. And Davidson said, I can do that. And they sort of smashed it onto this little residential lot. It wasn't like it was once on a larger lot and had been subdivided. That's the way it was originally designed. And I think they did a pretty nice job of trying to integrate it into a tiny, tiny landscape for a style that normally would have more space around it.
Yes, hi, George, it's Chrissy. I think that it would be helpful just to say that, because if you're thinking about the rustic style and the space, the outdoor space is a character defining feature of the style, and it doesn't exist here in such a jarring way that that's part of the story, then it just needs to be, I think, articulated a little bit more forthright.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Chrissy, do you have any additional comments?
No, I wanna live there too.
Yeah. Right. Ian? Okay. Well, you guys touched on most of the ones. I was like everyone else, just in awe. I mean, I love Park Service design, my favorite design style of all time, so yeah, there too. I would like to see in the summary, in general description, including rough redwood before the board and bat description, just to make sure that we know that it is a unique board and bat. And then I was gonna say include the shutters too, but you guys mentioned that those were added. So those are pretty unique to the description. And then kind of like how Steve has a thing about maps having scales and north arrows. I like floor plans to have overall dimensions. So if the basement and upper floor plan could have some overall dimensions, that would be helpful. Those relate to the main floor. And then for some reason on figure 1 on the map, it says Crater Lake National Park right above the site location. And I don't know if that was this text that got moved on the map accidentally, but I'm pretty sure Crater Lake National Park is not in the middle of that. Right? I wasn't just seeing things whenever I reviewed it.
That other building. Stuff.
Oh,
This is about East Main.
Yeah.
I didn't put that on there. You can blame ODOT for that. I have no idea why it's there. Or the USGS, I guess it was, yeah. I thought it was odd. It's right under, at one time, and Steve would know this more than I, the park owned the ranger's house was on Queen Anne Avenue, which is kind of where that citation is. I have no idea why the USGS put that on the map, but they did.
Because it's way bigger. The letter is way bigger than the lot itself. That was the superintendent's junior residence that was sold in 1965 to the present owners, as far as I know, was gone. The warehouse is the other part. That's why I included it in that long attachment I saw recently. The warehouse is one of these places where if you want it stolen, store it. And you'll see what I mean.
Steve, we'll turn it back over to you. You have some additional.
Well, it's just, this goes back to the research part of me, and as far as I know, there's no precedent for privately owned rustic architecture, unless it's an Adirondack break camp, to be on the National Register. It could be that no one's ever had the opportunity to nominate such as this. And what I would like to see, though, is some way of permanent private property with what is in essence dominated by public. Just me now, and if I were to make a motion, I thought about this. I'd like to see a resolution to that before it were to go forward to Washington.
I would suggest Chrissy offered a pretty elegant solution to address that, Steve, with that, just including some of the additional context you talked about, noting that more explicitly how you were talking about the more, this is usually on a broader, larger landscape, acknowledging that more explicitly, and then talking about how in this particular case, it's been adapted to the smaller lot, and that I think it does, that alone isn't in some way the significant fact that it is in this smaller space and how they adapted it. So I think, if you're agreeable, I think that's a workable solution.
Yeah. And I know in terms of integrity, you don't need all.
No, you don't know.
Ways around. Please don't.
I feel like that adds to its unique nature.
For the story.
I think it's fantastic.
Want to make a motion?
Well, I could. I move that we forward the, under, criterion C to the keeper of the National Register. Provided that there was some additional context included in the nomination to, resolve some of these problems, whether it's nomenclature, stuff, rustic. But I think there are ways, and I think, George, I can share you this copy that I don't know when I made this. In fact, the form says June 1991. I think it was done later, because it's on computer versus being typed. So with those understandings made in terms of forwarding, that's my motion.
And
Is there a second?
the thing should mention and the dimensions on the floor.
Yeah.
And then someone else.
That's the typos.
Yeah, corrections. I mean, the kind of, copy it and you might too before you send it on.
Have a motion.
Second.
Thank you. And any comments or other modifications to the motion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Great. Thank you, George. We appreciate it.
Thank you all very much for your careful reading. I will be looking for other examples behind Blackbird and on Oakdale.
Great. Right, last but not least, the nomination of is the McLean House in West Lynn, Clackamas County. And turn it over to Katie for initial presentation, please. Thank you, Chair. I do want to call attention to the fact that we are a little over time and with all evening in the buildings.
What's the time we need to be out?
Is it? We can say later. We try to keep this to half an hour and I'm more good to
Camden.
Thank you. The committee will now consider the Edward and Anne McLean House in West Lynn in Clackamas County, which is also a West Lynn local historic landmark. The McLean House is located in what is now a city-owned park at the edge of the Bolton neighborhood, directly facing the Willamette River and adjacent to the I-205 bridge. The nomination notes there are known archaeological sites on this property. However, the extent of the boundary of those archaeological sites is unknown and likely extend into other tech plots. So this nomination focuses solely on key resources. The primary built resource on the property is a single-family, two-story house. This was completed in 1927 and exhibits a modified colonial revival. Exterior character defining features include the house's symmetrical side gabled form with symmetrical smaller side volumes, original wood multi-pane windows and doors, an entry portico with pilasters and columns, and the rolled roof detail. At the interior, character defining features include the overall layout spaces with a series of defined rooms with communal spaces at the ground level and private spaces above. Other interior character defining features include the walnut trim, the living room fireplace, the primary stair with railing and balustrade, the floor and hexagonal floor tiles in the bathrooms, and built-in bookcases and cabinets.
The exterior of the house has experienced relatively few alterations since the end of the period of significance, the main ones being a slight enlargement of the balcony in the 1930s or 1940s. Advanced roof, and the replacement of the garage. The surrounding setting has been impacted by the construction of the I-205 bridge in 1970 and the consequent reduction in the property from 4 acres to about 2.5 acres. Additionally, some of the landscaping has been changed to accommodate more parking, more seating, and to add a small shed and gazebo, which are non-contributing, have also been added to the property. It does retain some frontage despite the construction of the bridge. The McLean House is significant under 2 different criteria with 2 different corresponding areas of significance and 2 different corresponding periods of significance. First, the nomination argues that the property is locally significant under criterion C in the area of architecture, with a period of significance of 1927 or the year of the house's completion, for possessing high artistic value and representing the distinctive characteristics of the most popular regional trends of the 1920s, especially the colonial revival. The nomination explains that the blending of characteristic colonial revival style features with an English cottage style rolled roof combines 2 closely allied building styles and makes the McLean House an excellent representation of the eclectic phase of colonial revival style within this local context of West Lynn. The nomination argues that McLean House is also locally significant under criterion A in the area of health/medicine for its association with the development of the Physicians Association of Clackamas County, which was a very early prepaid healthcare organization, or HMO, which was designed to serve the mill workers and their families in Clackamas County. The PAC was a very early health maintenance organization, and it would later be referenced as a national model for improving healthcare. The house's connection to the PACC is through Dr. Edward McLean, who commissioned this house and lived here with his family and had a home office on the 2nd floor. McLean was one of 3 local physicians who worked to establish the PACC in the 1930s in response to the inaccessibility of health insurance for local residents of Clackamas County. There are 2 clinic buildings associated with the PACC founders that also remain extant. But the nomination argues that neither of these held the high level of integrity possessed by the McLean House, and therefore it argues that this residence is the property that best communicates an association with that founding period of the organization. The period of significance for the property under criterion A begins in 1932, when that group of Westland doctors, including Dr. McLean, began to form the association and lay the foundations for the PACC. And it ends in 1938 when the organization was launched. In summary, the discussion for the committee today is, does the nomination make the case for local significance under criterion A in the area of health/medicine for its association with the Physicians Association of Clackamas County? Does the nomination make the case for local significance under criterion C in the area of architecture? And does the property retain sufficient integrity to communicate its significance under both of these criteria? We did receive the CLG's recommendation of the nomination with no additional comment, and this was provided to the committee via email. No other public comments were received. Does the committee have any questions for Shiblitz? We do have the preparer here today, and yes. And then
before you get started, are there any?
I don't think I have any conflict of interest. If you want to disclose my. This is ODA mentioned in the nomination as having an effect on the property. I don't work in any region or program area that has a connection to the project.
You have any issues with that? Okay. All right. Any other conflicts? Potential conflicts? Thank you for being here. We don't know the, yourself.
Thank you. Kristen Miner, 2146 Northeast 17th Avenue in Portland. And I am for nomination. I will keep my comments very short because we have such a tight timeline. I did want to note that I'm joined by Kevin Bonington, of Westland City Council. He has a few comments to make. And I also wanted to note that this project was funded through CLG funding, so thank you, Chappelle. And I also just wanted to say thank you to the city of Weston. I know that you'll probably have some questions, so I am not gonna say any more about the nomination, but I will be here to answer them.
And I want to short change, it's a big deal to do a national register nomination. So we'll figure it out.
City Councilor Kevin Bonington, Dave Westland. The
Yes.
177 Maple Street. Westland. So today I have kind of a great honor. It's been a great honor for the last few months in representing the city of Westland City Council. I made the trip here today to Astoria to emphasize the city's support for this. I'm also the council liaison to the Parks Board, which has somewhat recently played role in its operation. So, as was covered, McLean House was sold to the city in 1969 by Dr. McLean. For whatever reason, it wasn't next 10 years. I can't really speak to that there. But I can say that in the 80s, the Friends of McLean House was formed, and about 3 years, they put an incredible amount of love into restoring this property and keeping it really true to its condition that it's in. In some ways, when I look at the people who are involved in that effort, the names stand out to me as some of the pillars of, I guess, Westland community. It's kind of unique in that way. But specifically, I believe we need to do a little bit better job on the story of Dr. McLean's contribution to the history of healthcare. His work on what is essentially a old-timey HMO is really interesting, but it's not really well known. I also think that this area around Glen Falls, which is adjacent to, is frequently overlooked, simply because the development past 100 years has really fallen into disrepair. But there's good news. The cities of Westland, along with the Grand Rome, are working to bring this area back to its condition. This property sits on what will be a future park, and we intend to move forward planning that process for that park just as soon as ODOT finishes their site planning. So much of Westland's early history has been lost. It seems like through every passage in history books I read, it ends with an fire destroyed all 2 structures, which were then properly destroyed by the flood. But they rebuilt, and then it was destroyed again. And that's not a joke, that's the early history of Westland. Lately, it seems that every week I'm seeing a picture or reading a document that reveals another structure that once stood in this immediate area with which no one thought. With many of these, they didn't even think to go. Train stations, hotel, all gone. It's like, it's not for a lack of trying. I feel that because all of these things disappeared, Westland's significant contributions to early Oregon state history are completely overlooked. But you can't overlook something if there's actually nothing to see anymore. So, to keep a clean house from joining these other structures, not really a risk for, but also honoring it with a place in the National Historic Registry would be a significant step on past contributions that have been lost to time. Please help us do that today. Thank you.
Are there any questions of the owner? And then prepare the nomination.
I just had a question about why.
It's kind of difficult to make complete sense of it. It happened a couple of years ago, but it seems that the leadership felt like they were kind of getting in over their heads with how much money they you maintaining it. Not volunteers, and it dwindled over the years. So I met some very passionate people who have been part of this, and they're still involved. The best of the
I got a question too. Was there any discussion about criteria being given funds and to the plan?
Yes, that's perfect for me. I can consider looking. Thank you. There was definitely discussion about where it would be. Dr. McLean was one of a group of doctors that lived and worked in Clackamas County. There's kind of two reasons why it didn't feel like it was coming together under criteria the argument that one of those is that his work life took place almost entirely in Oregon City rather than in Westland. Westland, he certainly had his upstairs office where, you know, I'm trying to make a connection to his work life, certainly. But that was something that was outside of this normal sort of, seeing patients outside of the regular duties of his daily life. The second reason is he doesn't necessarily rise to the level of a person of significance in that way on his own, for me anyway.
I wasn't advocating one. I just wanted.
Yeah.
Jackie, would you like to lead us off in the review?
Yeah, and I would like to say that I was able to visit site and walk around grounds, and I was pleasantly surprised that it still really conveys its residential setting and its setting as kind of like a high-end landscaping, despite the fact that the bridge and bridge construction is happening there when I visited. So I feel like the setting integrity was pretty high in my opinion. And there was a really good background about the colonial revival style and really interesting to know it was a builder, designer, not why, the design was done by the builder, and then the history of the PACC. I felt like it's always good to learn a new aspect about history and the actual process and how these issues that we are dealing with today were solved, you know, on a local level for the community, and that there was that movement and care for those positions to put that together. Problem, and like we said, it's not something that's widely known, so it would be that this house is a good way to kind of tell that story. And I felt like the arguments for why the house represents that history were pretty well discussed. And I also did understand that it was good the mention of the archaeology, because it's going to play into any kind of development may happen in the future like that. And the integrity of the site. Cassie?
So I understand the purpose of mentioning the archaeology here, but I don't think it was tied in well enough. And to me, that section felt quite performative. And so I think to mention it needs to be tied in more directly to the nomination. And that's something that was mentioned in the nomination revision specifically, was to tie in this information to the nomination or strike it. And so I think that needs to be more clearly defined. Beyond that, I think I agree with your statements, and I think there's just a few little typos and technical things that can be cleaned up, but I don't really have much else to say.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, there's a lot of good information here. It's nice to know everything about healthcare that could be applied today. Back then, I did have a question though about the period of significance ending in 38. Is that just because that was the one? I try to understand why that's the ending period of significance.
It's because that is when the PACC launched.
Mm-hmm.
So the work that Dr. McLean would have been doing, to kind of figure that out and, sort of reach out to the mill workers and the mill owners, all of that work would have been, for the most part, concluded when they started that.
Else? I don't have any other comments. Thorough explanation.
Thank you. I felt the same way, that it was well written. And beyond what's been said before me, I don't have additional comments to add.
I'd say overall, I'll just sort of read from my evaluation sheet. There don't appear to be any problems in terms of integrity. Description, it would be nice to have the contributing and non-contributing clearly identified in there. General description is good. Significance in context, good for the most part. A few places where some editing could be made. This idea, that preemption was allowed as 1841. You're in a contested territory. And I'm not sure if there's any precedence of granting people a preemption right when you're still in treaty negotiations with another country. So I don't know if that's something to be looked at or not. And then the only two other things I have are that the treaty, you know, a lot of these nominations, they're done at a time, you know, we live in low light for at least 4 months of the year, you know, so that profile tree strikes me as a giant sequoia, not a tree, because of wide shape. Okay. And the last thing was, I thought it was really interesting that people would try to imitate thatch in the Pacific Northwest. I never, from the photos or from the description, I just thought, oh, that's all pilot. You're going to try to imitate that. That's it.
There's a couple of those in Southwest Florida.
Oh, in Northeast.
Great.
Yes, so I wanted to acknowledge and thank the council member for coming today. I'm new to this one. It's nice to see the representation and support like that. So I want to acknowledge taking the time out of your day to do this and to share your information. I also, along with my colleague, my archaeology colleagues, I noted that even though Katie had mentioned that this is focused on the built resources, I think clarifying some of the early history of the property and mentioning the artifacts found that signify the previous occupation, I think it would help to have that addressed more fully. I especially appreciated the connection that you drew to Dr. McLean's life, and appreciated the inclusion of all the PACC and the federal case information, even though it's focused on a local significance. I thought that added and appreciated that being included. Thanks.
I thought that we were talking earlier about what to do when there's archaeological resources within the boundaries of a property being nominated for architecture. And I actually think this could be a really good model. You bring that stuff up from the footnotes, integrate it into the narrative. And I think it's really nice, really elegant. I think addressing it's there. There's been studies, we know it, maybe talking a little bit more about it. But not, there's no struggle there. It's just for future use, for future endeavors, for future knowledge, that it's in here. So yeah, I think it could be really a nice solution.
Yeah, I think done a really nice job here. There's a lot of really good information. I think when I was reading through it, I would encourage you to skim through it. There's some turns of phrase or other kinds of information, and sometimes just ordering. It seems like it's emphasizing a criterion B versus a criterion A nomination. I mean, he's an important person. He's compelling. So I think for our Park Service reviewers, just making sure that we're watching kind of our nouns and verbs and those kinds of things, make sure we have topic sentences that are constantly driving towards the criterion we're shooting for, I think is really important. If it exists, it would be nice to have some more, because you talked about the organizing activities, the workers and that type of thing, including that type of information, even if it's anecdotal, would help bring the context to support your local, your selection for local significance, but also kind of keep it off of the individual and more on the history there. So I don't know if that exists. Maybe it doesn't, in which case perhaps using what you do have to its greatest extent by maybe moving it a little higher, so a little more prominent in the text. And then for criterion C, I think similar approaches, a lot of good information there, but I think some of the information could be brought more center to kind of what you're talking about. So again, it's all there. I think it's just about a little bit of just putting a sharper point on what you've already written. So, and I have some further comments I'll give to Katie for that.
Okay. Me, I just had a couple of things on a couple sheets, but it's no big deal, yeah. Really enjoyed reading it, and I thought it was well. No concerns on meeting criteria, accuracy. Jackie? Any other comments or thoughts?
Just a few other comments, and one of them was like, I was very impressed that the fact that it was city owned since 1970, and it's just an amazingly maintained, authentic, all its character, defining features are there, they're maintained and viewed all this time under public ownership and the care of the Friends group. And that's something that's kind of special to me. And also there was a typo in the boundary description with the highway. So, other than that, I would like to recommend that we send this nomination for the McLean House under criterion C and A for significance and forward to the keeper with some minor changes and amendments that we discussed during this meeting.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
If you would like anything recycled, you could just pile it right there in front of Julie.
Just to
Yep. We could do that.
That's 3-2.
Is there any other business to discuss today?
I'd just like to add, if everyone has notes, that they can make sure that I'll go around and after the meeting is adjourned. So like that into our responses.
I will email them to you on Monday.
Okay, great.
Should we leave this with you so we?
Yes, please.
Okay, bring those all.
Should we hold on to these or leave them to you as well? I mean, tags.
What's been our precedent on that?
Let me take the, we have it, but if you'd like us to throw them in the box, if you'd like us to throw them in the goodie box, we can do that too.
We don't have to. We didn't get it. I saw the look on your face.
I'll put it with this so it's together.
Okay, that's fine, we'll take care of that.
If we are finished, we do need a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? One sticker. All right, thank you all. Thank you.
If you'd like to take a copy